Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. I saw two Zoffs for a minute and I was like really shocked. I wondered who your
No,
evil twin was.
it's just one. Last week when I tried to log on, it wouldn't connect. No matter how I tried, it wouldn't connect. This week, it starts to connect, and then I couldn't hear anything, and it disconnected. And then I tried again, and there was no sound. This time, it's the little thing is still thinking, but it shows my headset's connected twice, and I don't know how that can be.
Okay, well, no, things happen. Things happen. I'm excited. We're going to get going here. Hey, I did tell Pastor Brian something interesting. I included Hillside in the dedication for the dissertation. You guys have been a real help to me through the process, and even Pastor Brian. So there you go. I only need to see this like once. I'm seeing things like more than once. So I'm going to go ahead and get myself together here. Pull that back in. There we go. And I can see me. I look a little under the chin here. My chair keeps dropping on me. I feel like gluing it in the same place. What can I say? I keep getting shorter every time I sit in this office chair.
Yeah,
Makes
I
me,
have one of those that the gasket no longer holds air properly, so it keeps dropping.
yeah, it's annoying, but
Yeah.
bigger things and worse things in life can happen. So I'm just looking to see. Okay. We're going to get started here. I thought there was a YouTuber on, but well, now there might be. I don't know. That's interesting. We're going to be picking up with the calendar. So I called this What About the Calendar of Israel Part 2. We're going to have a little bit left over because the last feast of Israel is a prophetic feast. And I want to spend a little time on prophecy and where this goes. Because this is a feast that I believe every Christian will have the right to attend and will be in the kingdom. So I did not just stick, kind of jamming it at the end here. I felt it was important as part of its own thing to actually give a little bit of time to that. So we're not going to be perfectly within the pericopes because there's so much here. I have spoke for years in Chosen People delivering messages on each of these feasts, just to tell you the amount of material that's in there.
Hmm.
So it would be disadvantageous for me to treat these with any less beauty than they deserve. And there's a lot of beauty here with these feasts. So that's kind of where we are at. I'm going to switch over to screen share, and I'm hoping that my any YouTubers that want to come. I did a little thing on election, and I think I may have ruffled feathers, so I don't know. I'm torn. If I wanted the big numbers on YouTube, maybe you need to say less. So I'm trying to skirt between saying what I feel needs to be said, making sure it's said the right way. It's the way it is. God blesses, and He's going to bring who He's going to bring, and He's going to bring the people He wants to be there. Because at the end of the day, yes, I really do believe in God's sovereignty. I just also am,
I do too, and I think he's not kind to usurpers.
you know, and I think that I also am really big on human responsibility because every time I share the gospel, I've got to believe that the people I'm talking to do have a choice, and that's hard stuff, but that's where we're at. So I'm going to go to the screen share. It should say more should include screen share. Why is that? Let me do this screen share. Okay, well, when all's in doubt. Okay. Um, they in why do I see two of me? Oh, I know I see two of me. No, I don't know why I see two of me. I have just been doubled. Okay. I am confused by that. Um, oh, I know why. Okay. Ha ha ha. I understand why now. That's interesting. I created a new screen thing with a verse and then a picture of me after I would gotten the news of my dissertation being accepted with my little doctoral mug. And so I was seeing two of me because I was seeing my own picture and then I was seeing the feed. That was really weird. Um, so Calendar of Israel Part 2. We are in Leviticus 23. That is the calendar chapter. So,
23. Okay.
and thank you to Jesse. Jesse was telling me, that Jesse made my day because I didn't know how that broadcast had come out, and somebody benefited. My day, if I teach and somebody gets a benefit, I'm like on cloud nine. I feel the Lord's pleasure in me when I teach, and I feel his blessing when someone else gets blessed. So thank you, Jesse. We're going to finish up because I just want to look at, this is for Jesse. I just want to look at how Israel's election plays out in the New Testament. So hang in there. You're going to learn a lot about Romans 9, 10, and 11 if you tune in on Wednesday. Because I just want to go over that. How does Israel's election being different play out? But before I can do that, today we're going to talk about how Israel's calendar plays out and what it means for us. So there's good stuff coming here. So we're in Leviticus 23. That's the calendar chapter. Now, remember, I told you, I always tell you the take home from last week. And what I really should do is go through and at the end of our study in Leviticus, like have a book of take homes. So you could actually follow like the applications made each week. I've thought about that. That would really be kind of a cool thing.
That's a good idea.
All the applications after I get the dissertation corrections done. I'm just busy doing the revisions to submit the manuscript. So that'll be like a future project. Last week, we learned that the word moed, which means appointed time, also has the idea of rehearsals. And so the Feast of Israel are rehearsals of the redemption that we enjoy in Messiah. How's that for a great take-home truth? And that was last week. Now, this week, there'll be another take-home truth. Now, one of the things I didn't spend a lot of time on, and I want to take a little time, is we're going to see that there's a particular book read during Pentecost that is ironically, ironic, yet really very revealing. Okay, and this is a Jewish custom. Sometimes Jewish customs fall in such a way that not only do they reflect the Bible intended, but the rabbis even accidentally reflect the Bible in ways they didn't intend. Such is the work of God. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what are called the Megillot. When I was growing up, you'd say the whole Megillah. And Megillot comes from the word Megillah. There are 5 scrolls in the writings that are traditionally read at holiday times. The Jews have their Bible arranged in the law, the prophets, and the writings. That's why Jesus uses that language. So I grew up with the last book in my Bible at home being 2nd Chronicles. And so there are 5 of these scrolls. Okay. They follow Psalms, Proverbs, and Job in the other order that you're used to, and precede Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Chronicles. So that's where they fit in that section of the way your Bible's arranged. Now, your Bible's arranged based on a change in the order that occurred when the Septuagint was translated from Hebrew to Greek. They may have been grouped together because they were the shortest books, but they also have a common usage. They're read during certain holidays. Okay. And they also maintained the same order throughout Jewish history in terms of the compiling of the Bible. Now, understand that, at one point, we had separate books. They were not hardbound. And so the Bible had to be compiled. And actually, Michael Rydelnik makes the argument that the very compiling of the Bible itself teaches us something. And I've read that too. Song of Songs is one of those books. Now, each of these are read on the Sabbath or on a holiday or the Sabbath of a holiday. The first one of these is Song of Songs, or what's called canticles in your Old English Bibles, very old English Bibles. A canticle was a song. This is read on the Shabbat of Passover, which is in March and April. Now, we've already talked about Passover, but one of the things I didn't mention is this liturgical reading that occurs on the Sabbath of Passover. Okay, the use of the song at Passover coincides with the interpretation of Song of Songs as a celebration of God's love for Israel. It expresses God's deliverance of Israel from Egypt and from the Red Sea, and God's meeting with Israel, Sinai. Song of Songs can be understood as a story of relationship between God and Israel. Now, let me give a caveat. I don't think that that's what Song of Songs is interpretively about. But Israel wasn't the only one to do that. The church fathers viewed Song of Songs as an allegory of God's love for the church. Israel did that prior to the church fathers doing that. Now, do I believe that we can apply things to human relationships and that human love mirrors the love of God in the way God designed it to be? Now, let me be careful. Men are sinners, so human love does not mirror God's love in the way it was intended to be mirrored. But if we had not fallen, what the design was for our love to mirror divine love. So if the world had not fallen, human love would perfectly mirror divine love. And in that sense, I have no problem saying that Song of Songs is illustrative of God's love for Israel or for the church, in the sense that human love was intended to mirror God's love. But the fall messed it up. Interpretively, the Song of Songs is scandalous. In fact, by rabbinical tradition, until a man is 30, he's not allowed to read the Song of Songs because it is highly graphic in its imagery. And people who don't have a Hebraic background do not know how graphic Song of Songs is. It is about romantic love. And really, if anyone ever had the idea that God hates human romantic love between a man and woman, the Song of Songs stands as a testimony against that. So I'm just letting you know why the Jews read it during Passover, because they view it as a picture of, by allegory, from human love to divine love, God's love for Israel. We've already covered Passover, so we're not going to go back to that. But you do need to be aware it's there, and there is some value to it. Nicely translated in English. It's not as steamy, and so you can get away with reading it. We just finished our discussion about Pentecost, and this is where this gets really interesting. You see, out of the Megillot, the book that is read during Pentecost is Ruth. Now, I made brief mention of this, but I glanced by it and I felt that I had not done it justice, that I had not really let the beautiful relationship between Pentecost and the book of Ruth get explored. And I felt that although this is not a biblical interpretation, the irony of the providence of God in having Ruth read during Pentecost cannot be overlooked. This is a case in which there is an ironic yet profound twist of providence with the Jewish people and the writings that God gave them, which form the front part of our Bible. And so I could not pass this by. Golden Gay, John, just makes the note that it's read during Pentecost. And the reason the Jews give for reading, if they need, a reason, if you went to a rabbi and said, I need, what reason do you have for doing this? The book of Ruth takes place during the season of Pentecost and during the time period when Pentecost would occur. Now, understand Israel's climate and the way things work. There is an early harvest and a late harvest. There are former rains and latter rains, and these became very important images in the Bible as they were connected to the land and the people. And remember that for Israel, the land, the people, and God form a relational triangle. All right, there's a direct connection between them. All right, so the book of Ruth ends with the barley harvest. Now, that's the first harvest in the land of Israel. So Jewish people made an association between the timing of the book of Ruth and Shavuot. So although Shavuot is about the giving of the law in the mind of the Jewish people, there's a secondary involvement with the book of Ruth that occurs because of the timing. So when you open up the book of Ruth, you should get two things out of it, other than a wonderful set of humorous word plays that most people don't get if you don't know the Hebrew. I love reading through the book of Ruth and putting in the meaning of the names because there's some real humor in there. That if I was doing a study on Ruth, I would take the time with. But understand the two things you should get is Ruth occurs in the chronology of Israel during the time of the judges, when every man did what was right in his own eyes. It's a time of great apostasy, actually, for Israel. Some of the worst apostasy occurs during that time period because there are fluctuating cycles of disobedience and obedience as Israel cries out to God. But the second thing you need to know is not only where in Israel's history it fits, but where in the seasonal cycle it fits. And it fits during this first harvest. So you would have rain, you would have this sort of climate thing go on, you would have barley, which grew well during that year. You would harvest the barley, and that would be your first harvest. It is the last of the biblical spring holidays. All right, so we're going to move to the fall holidays. Now, I know there are additional holidays in the Jewish calendar. They are not Leviticus 23 holidays. Do I have a problem with them? No, not necessarily. God can go beyond Leviticus 23, and I think he has with Hanukkah, which is coming up, because Jesus actually celebrated Hanukkah, and if it's good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me not to be too upset over. And so, yes, I see a basis for remembering, and there's some cool stuff with Hanukkah. We've done some stuff at Hillside. This year, I don't know what's going to happen with COVID, so I'm not even guessing what we're going to be able to do and what we're not. You just need to know that. So we can say, okay, here's the funny thing. Here's the book of Ruth, read during Shavuot, which is about the giving of the law and God, essentially covenant relationship, the marriage of Israel to God the Father. And here's this book of Ruth, okay? And I have the first part of Ruth here, okay? It centers around a famine due to God's displeasure with Israel. Don't miss what the days of Judges is about. The judges rule the land during a time when Israel is not doing well spiritually, and that's why there's a famine in the land. There's not a famine just because the weather was bad. Israel is misbehaving, and God is using invaders and oppressors and famine to get Israel's attention as to her disobedience. That's the way he worked. A certain man from Bethlehem, ironically, Bethlehem means house of bread. But there's a famine in the land. So a man from the house of bread during a famine because of Israel's disobedience goes to Moab. You see the humor as you add the names back in and the irony? And so this is a time of disobedience, and this book is ironic because it's read during the time when Jews regard the law as being given. So you're reading a book about Israel's disobedience during the anniversary of when the law was given, which features as a heroine not a Jewish person, but a Gentile woman from Moab. And I just include Leviticus 28:23 to show you that when Israel disobeyed, that's when you had a famine or exile. How do I know that? Because God says that the heavens will be over your head as shall be brass, and the earth below is iron. That was the penalty for disobedience. Now, the book of Ruth centers around one key Hebrew concept that we can't miss. We're going to piece this together. It's the term goel. Okay, it is such an important concept. We're going to see the part this concept plays. This is where biblical theology is so useful and so much fun, because we can look at these concepts, these central ideas. According to Deuteronomy 25, 5 through 10, a widow without issue, that means no children, okay? That's King James again, should be taken by her husband's brother to perpetuate the seed and thus ensure a succession of the land which is bound to the male descendants. This was a feature, land passed from man to man. By the way, England had similar laws, and it's in the background of your Jane Austen novels. So, I mean, it's interesting that this sort of plays out in later cultures that pass land that way. The near relative here, and they have Yabam. The root goel is not used in the situation in Ruth, but two things are mentioned: the field and the Levirate marriage, which tie the goel. And what I want to say with the near relative here is that there's a direct connection between the concept of goel. And this is a comment, by the way, R. Laird Harris. So it's not my comment. I almost want to look through the book of Ruth because I'm wondering if the term goel does appear somehow when he's referring to a particular. Oh, the word goel doesn't appear in the Deuteronomy 25, 5 through 10 passage, but it does appear in the Ruth passage. And that's what Harris is pointing out. The funny thing is what happened through time. This concept of the kinsman redeemer became a central way of looking at redemption. How do we understand redemption? Well, redemption means to buy back. Well, what do you buy back? Well, you buy back property and you rescue a line of your brother who, if he dies without sons, his line is cut off from Israel. And so this kinsman redeemer becomes an important figure and becomes a picture of what it means to be redeemed. In fact, the verb is used as one of the verbs in relation to redemption. As you study the concept of redemption, Leon Morris did a thing that was incredible called The Apostolic Preaching of the Cross. And then there's a more lay version. It's a wonderful book. It's just a word study on all the word groups that deal with the idea of redemption and atonement. And it's a wonderful book. And it's what I call the way you should do Bible, because he traces these concepts through. It's glorious. And I don't know the name of the lay version, but I can get that. It's just a wonderful book. It's study, it's just word study, but he gives you the insights. And so this became to stand for God as Israel's redeemer. What happened was the Israelites began to look and say, wow, just as the kinsman redeemer redeems a family line and the land, so too God is our kinsman redeemer. He's my goel. He's my goeli, my kinsman redeemer. And a big hi to Jack who's out there. So glad he made it. So God, this is the cool thing with Ruth. It's read during the period of the law, about a period of disobedience to the law. The heroine is a Gentile woman. The male hero is a goel. And God became known as my goeli, my kinsman redeemer. So if you want a cool devotional time, sit down and think about God as your goeli, your kinsman redeemer, one who is like you, can be, has enough of a nature that you can be identified with him. He's a kinsman, but he's also your redeemer. And this concept really was very useful because what it does is it allows a redeemer who is both fully a redeemer and fully able to identify with the people. And Jesus is that for us. He's our goel. So that's really a cool insight. Now, this is read during Pentecost. So here's the book of Ruth and here's the book of Romans. We're going to be spending some time there on Wednesday for the folks that tune in on YouTube related to Israel's election and New Testament and the fact there's some differences and how they get reconciled and what we can learn. But the bottom line is the book of Ruth even relates to Romans 11. Because we have a situation here by which Israel's stumbling allows the gospel to go to the Gentile nations. And so that becomes real important. And so Romans 11 says that Israel didn't fall as to, you know, they stumbled that they should, did they stumble so that they should fall, that they should be permanently removed? No. But through their fall to provoke them to salvation, salvation has come to the Gentiles. Now watch this. If their fall is riches for the world and their failure riches for the Gentiles, how much more will the fullness be? Now, why do I go here? Because I want to show you something really neat in Romans 11. What you have in Romans 11 is that Israel's position changes. And God goes to the Gentile nations. Now, what you have here, and by the way, this is the homily that we used at my wedding, because my wife is my Ruth. She's my Gentile bride. And I am the Jewish bridegroom. And in the same way, we have the church that is predominantly Gentile, so predominantly Gentile, a Gentile bride with a Jewish bridegroom who is the kinsman redeemer. So as Boaz took Ruth, so Jesus has taken the church. And so there really is some neat connections here for us. And so what can we get out of this? Shavuot is about the law, but there's a kinsman redeemer who redeems us from the penalty of disobedience to the law, that by his death we might be saved. And he has purchased us as our Goeli, our kinsman redeemer, so that we might be his. And raised up for us an inheritance that is beyond all imagination. Well, now we deal with the fall feasts, but that should have hopefully been worth the price of admission, if nothing else. There's a lot here, but let me move through this. Now you can see why a sermon could be done on any one of these feasts. Rosh Hashanah is the first of the fall feasts. We are long past Rosh Hashanah. We were in the thick of COVID during Rosh Hashanah. Actually, we were in COVID during Pentecost and Shavuot. We were in COVID during Yom Kippur. Were in COVID during Sukkot. At least the last of the spring feasts and the first of the fall feasts, actually even Passover. So really, this year, as far as the Jewish calendar, we have basically lived through COVID the whole time. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, speak to the children of Israel saying, now remember that always introduces another feast. In the 7th month, on the first day of the month, you shall have a Sabbath rest, a memorial, the blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation. Now, some of the YouTube folks have gotten a lot of this material because I've done stuff like this. I broadcasted, but I still think it's worthwhile to go through. And I've even thrown in a picture of a shofar. You shall do no customary work. Now, the shofar is central during Rosh Hashanah, and from the period of Rosh Hashanah until the last thing on Yom Kippur, the shofar is blown. It is not blown at an ordinary synagogue services. A lot of Messianic congregations blow it at ordinary synagogue services. While this is very nice and very familiar to a Jewish person, an Orthodox Jewish person knows you don't do that. What a shofar is never made out of is out of a cow's horn. Now think like a Jewish person. I love being able to do this. Jewish people look at this as reenactment. We're remembering before God so that it might be brought to his mind who forgets nothing, but it might be front and center. Before him we do this. Before him we remind. Think of communion that way for a few seconds. Think of the Lord's Supper that way for a few seconds. Not I'm doing this, but I am doing this before God. He is literally sitting next to me as I take the bread and cup in whatever form that takes. For the Jewish person, the minute he raises that shofar to blow it, he is literally placing that ram's horn before God. See? And the reason it's never a cow's horn is because that would remind God of the golden calf incident. Now, what you don't want to do is remind God of the golden calf incident. That was not a good thing. And so it is never out of a cow's horn. when reminding God of his covenant to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, you do not want to remind him with a symbol of your great sin. See, look at the cow's horn. Oh, I want to remind you of my covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But what I'm really reminding you is one of the worst cases of idolatry in our entire history. Have a nice day. And so Jews never use a cow's horn. They use a ram's horn to remind God of his covenant to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Remember your covenant with the fathers, and thus remember me. And grace for the Jewish person is tied to the idea of covenant. And so when I think about salvation, I always have to think about it in terms of covenant. I am a member of the new covenant. What God has called me to is the new covenant community. But I don't want to steal too much from like a Wednesday. That is the way I think about election. I'm elected to a purpose and to a community, which includes my salvation, because I could not be a part of that community without it. But it is not just a personal choice of me in isolation. It is a personal choice of me into something. And so it's meant to symbolize repentance. And as I said, it's tied to the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. You substituted a ram for Isaac. You substituted a lamb for Isaac. Remember Isaac, remember your substitution, and remember me, O Lord. The other ceremony that takes place is a ceremony called Tashlich. And really, interestingly enough, this year we did not get to a stream. This is Arizona. And we had COVID, and, it was really hot. I mean, Arizona, Tashlich, you don't want to be standing around outside. But Jewish people traditionally will go to a stream. They will either throw stones or bird crumbs. Bird crumbs, if they're more ecologically minded, since they're biodegradable. Bird crumbs, breadcrumbs, sorry, because the birds will eat them. Bird crumbs is if you threw the birds at the bread, and that's not the idea here. And you will throw stones in. Now, traditionally, it's stones because of Micah 7:19, where it says that God has cast our sins into the depths of the sea. The image of him throwing like stones into the depths of the sea and them sinking out of sight where they can never be seen again. This is called Tashlich. And it pictures God's forgiveness, which is what the Jewish person is really hoping for, so that they might receive God's blessings. Now, not necessarily eternal life. See, that's a little different for Jewish people too, but that God might prosper them and protect them and be with them through the next year. And so you'll go to a body of water. The scripture, Micah 7, is read. So that passage is always read by the stream as you're throwing the stones in, to connect the visual with the scripture and the scripture with its truth. All right. Now, I didn't do this year, but my son-in-law and daughter actually went and did Tashlich. And that blessed my heart, because we were not able to do it. So in a sense, they did what we could not do or were unable to do for us. And we were with them in spirit as they did that. And so that was a real blessing to me. That's Rosh Hashanah. There's a lot more to it because it's in the 7th month, but it's really called the New Year. I'm not going to take as much time with that. I do when I give a message on Rosh Hashanah. But I'm going to take us to the Day of Atonement and spend a little time. The Lord spoke to Moses saying on the 10th day of the 7th month, so Rosh Hashanah is the first day, Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement, is the 10th day. It's the only Jewish holiday that's a biblical holiday that does not fall on a new moon, which is the beginning of the month, or a full moon, which is the 14th or 15th day of the month. Isn't that interesting? All the other of these 7, with the exception of the Sabbath. Okay, so it's the second of the 2, because the Sabbath is weekly. So, I mean, you're going to have that thing go on with a month being formed in more than 1 week. Here's the thing. This holiday will not fall on a new moon or a full moon. I remember the big thing with the blood moons And I kind of smiled because statistically, Jewish holidays will fall on new moons or blood moons. And the only time, and you can appreciate this, Dan, the only time Daniel, well, Dan's okay. I hope. The only time you can have a lunar eclipse that is visible at all is when you have a full moon, because of what a lunar eclipse is. And so why shouldn't the lunar eclipses fall during the Jewish holidays that have a full moon? And so that's what you have. It's a holy convocation. You will afflict your souls and offer an offering made by fire to the Lord. You shall do no work on that same day, for it is the day of atonement to make atonement for you before the Lord. Whoops. I'm sorry. My thing clipped. Any person who is not afflicted in soul on that same day shall be cut off from his people, and any person who does any work on that day, that person I will destroy from among his people. Hey, there's a periscoper on. Greetings to you. So this is Yom Kippur. It carried with it a death penalty. And this was a big thing. It shall be a day of solemn rest. When does it start? On the 9th day of the month at evening. Because remember, the Jewish calendar, it always starts at sunset and goes to the next sunset. You shall celebrate your Sabbath. Now there it means ceasing. Customs for today. Fasting, al-chet, and kol nidre. Let me talk about these. A Jewish person has to afflict their soul. How do you afflict your soul? Well, we don't do the whipping ourselves or banging ourselves in the head with a book, like the monks did. Okay, we don't do that. What do Jewish people do? Well, they fast. They do what's called al-chet, which means all sins, and they confess the sins of the community as if they had participated in all of them. I hated that as a young kid because there were things in that list that I just wasn't old enough to do yet. And I didn't feel I should ask forgiveness for something that I was physically incapable of doing. And I probably mentally wasn't quite there yet either. So there's the al-chet, which is a long litany of sin that the community could have done, and I am identifying with the community, and I'm identifying my sins. It's a corporate confession is what it is. Now, some of the high church still does stuff like this. For sins of omission which we have committed, forgive us, O Lord. For sins of, lying which we have committed, forgive us, O Lord. The Catholic and high church does this. Where do you think they got the idea from? Well, there was probably some bleed over. Whether al-chet existed at that time or not, things like it might very well have existed. Kol nidra, I do not do. It means all vows. The problem with Kol nidra is it was designed during the time when Jews were forced converted. A horrible practice because no one gets saved by being forced to mouth the words, I believe in Jesus, if there's no actual faith there. Like if I like hypnotize you and drug you until you say you believe in Jesus, but you've never made a personal decision, that's absolutely meaningless. So forced conversion is no conversion. Kol nidre was a way to repatriate forced converts back into the Jewish community, where they basically said all vows and obligations which we have made this year, we now are free from. That's just the way it worked. Okay. And so that's Kol nidre. I don't like it because I'm not free from every vow and promise I made during the year just because I say so. Oops. God's gracious provision. Okay, let me go there. Whoa. What happened? Okay. Let me go down here and go here and try to go back. Somehow I ended up out of slideshow. I've never had that happen before. But let's go here. Wow, we're pretty far into this. I did not realize that we were that far into our teaching today. There we go. We don't want to do that. Okay, there's our gracious provision. Let me put that back into slideshow from current slide. There we go. There it is. Neat little slide transition. concept of covenant and God's presence. For the Jewish person, God's presence is the key to everything. Okay, God's covenant and presence is what Yom Kippur is about. It is not about individual forgiveness of sin. Fasting once a year never, ever, ever, ever gave people eternal salvation. And that's not the way Jewish people thought. Okay, God's presence is the key. It's the key with tabernacle. It's the key with Jewish people. As long as God is present with us, as long as God is with us, we will have provision. We will have peace. We will have life as it's meant to be. We will be able to reflect his image the way we are supposed to, for he is here with us. There isn't much teaching on God's presence a lot of times. And I kind of wish there was. Learning to be still. I'm not talking about, like losing your mind and going Eastern. I'm talking about just being still. Be still and know that I am God. Sensing his presence. Rejoicing in his presence. Taking his presence to work. Lord, I'm sitting down to work now. I'm going to be working. I ask that you might be present with me and we might do life together as I do this work. Help me to do life with you as I enter into this project, this task. Be present with me. I had a guy in college. He really challenged me. We didn't agree on everything, but he did something interesting. He would greet me every morning with God is with you. How are you doing, man of God? Or God is with you. And I thought that is so cool. I thought those ancient greetings that we don't use anymore are so theologically poignant. I wish we did. What would it do to challenge somebody to greet them as woman of God or man of God, lady of God, or a man of God? What would it do to someone's sense of not only accountability, but giving them something to attain to, giving them something to aspire to? Because that's what that did for me. It humbled me, but it also gave me something I want to be that. He just called me that. I want to be that. Nothing speaks to me more about wanting to be something than to be it named. Because in Jewish thinking, to name something is to state its essence. And so that means a lot. And it meant a lot to the Jewish person. God's presence, he is with me. But blood was required. Now I'm going to be dealing with this again because Dr. Singer wants a bloodless Judaism and he wants a bloodless Bible and he wants to change atonement because he can't stand the fact that atonement is what it is. And it's important because if atonement isn't what it is, then everything falls apart. Our gospel is a gospel that required the death of Jesus. The Council of Yavin replaced the blood sacrifice. And we deal with Yohanan ben Zakkai, who is an architect of this, Rabbi Singer, who does not like what we believe and certainly wants no other Jewish person ever to consider it as long as they live, and fervently attacks it, is running off of a post-Yavne Judaism. And so it was replaced with all sorts of other things. So when people say to me, why don't Jewish people know they need a blood atonement? Because Yavne changed everything. Let's take a prophetic lesson from this. What does this mean for us? We're not going to go out in the backyard and sacrifice a cow. Don't do that. You'll get in trouble. It's not good. It's not wise, and it's not going to provide anything for you. Jesus is our high priest. Hebrews 9, 6 through 12. Okay, the Jewish person is in the same place as the non-Jewish person. We need to trust in God's provision. No Judaism, no works, no other system is of any good, because without blood it is not possible to have forgiveness of sin. This is what Singer is arguing about in some recent videos. If you believe for 1 second that without blood it is impossible to have forgiveness of sin, then you will be ready to throw yourself, if you're honest, towards the gospel. When I realized there was no other atonement and that I needed atonement, yeah, conviction is important. But when you have conviction and you don't have any provision, then you're going to be looking for a provision. Let me read 9, 6 through 12. It's only 6 verses. It's not bad. Now, when these things had been prepared, the high priest always went into the first part of the temple and performed the services. But into the second part, the high priest went alone once a year, not without blood, which he offered for himself and for the people's sins committed in ignorance. The Holy Spirit was indicating this, that the way into the holiest of all had not yet been made manifest while the first tabernacle stood. That's the tabernacle we're talking about during this time period. It was symbolic for the present time when both gifts and sacrifices are offered, which cannot make the person who performs the service perfect in regard to conscience, or the conscience, concerned only with foods and drinks, various washings and fleshly ordinances, imposed until the time of reformation comes. Jesus is our high priest. Every time I go over this, this is a key thing. Jesus is not just a provision, is not only a past provision, but it's a present provision. Jesus has not lost his job. He is still terribly busy on our behalf. He provided the blood. There's going to be a host of other explanations, but he provided the blood. And that's the prophetic lesson. Well, we're getting, we still have about 15 minutes here, so let's see what we can do with Sukkot. This is a very long passage, so if you want to turn to Leviticus 23, 39 through 44, let me hit the high points of this. It's the 15th day of the 7th month. That means it's the full moon of the 7th month. Okay, that's what you need to understand here. And that makes it real easy because I can look at the sky and know you've gathered in the fruit of the land. This is the latter harvest. Remember, Pentecost is the early harvest, the barley harvest. This is the latter harvest. For 7 days, this is a long thing. You shall keep your Sabbath rest. The 8th day is just so we have Sabbath rest. Now, what you'll do is you'll take the fruit of beautiful trees, branches, palm branches, boughs, and leafy trees and willows of the brook, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God. You shall keep the feast of the Lord for 7 days in a year. It shall be a statute forever, which means perpetually in your generations. Okay? We've talked about olam. Sometimes it means perpetually, continuously. You shall celebrate in the 7th month. You will dwell in booths. You shall dwell in little tabernacles. Okay? I had one pastor who kept referring to this as the Feast of Booths, and we kept reminding him that really no alcohol is what this is about. Because the way we use that term, that you brought them out of the land. When I brought you out of the land of Egypt, I am the Lord your God. And so Moses declared to the children of Israel the feasts of the Lord. Okay? Now we're going to finish up with this feast because there's a prophetic element to it. And there's some take home that I really want for you guys that we're just not going to get to today, just because we're really getting there, And I had an old professor that said the mind can only absorb what the seat can endure. Jewish people now build a sukkah. Now, I don't do this, and I didn't grow up doing this because my dad was not a construction guy. He was an accountant. And in those days, you did not have prefabricated sukkahs for the constructionally challenged. And so I didn't grow up with this. You would go to the synagogue if you were constructionally challenged and go ahead and have the synagogue built. Now, in New York, they even build them on the sidewalks. You would eat in the sukkah. In some places, you would sleep in the sukkah, not advisable in certain parts of the world. but some people would actually sleep in the sukkah. And the sukkah is built so that there's a roof over it, but you can see the stars through it. So it's not a sturdy structure. It's a temporary structure with some leafy balms over it, and you could usually see one or two of the stars in it. And you would sleep in the sukkah. And then finally, there's what's called the etrog and the lulav. Now, I don't have one to show you. There's something else I didn't do. I wanted to. They were a little hard to procure. They were generally expensive, and I didn't do this. There were some things that are Jewish customs that, Jewish people almost had to be wealthy to do. I'm not saying that particularly, but there were things we just didn't do. And you could go to the synagogue. So my Orthodox grandfather could go to the synagogue and do this. The etrog is a citrus fruit from Israel. And the lulav are those branches tied together. So you have the palm branch, the myrtle, the willow of the brook, which is the weeping willow, or, the willow family. And then you had the goodly tree, which was myrtle. And by the way, all four of those kinds of plants grow here in Arizona. So you have what's called the four species or the four kinds. They're bound together and they're shaken in all four in every direction to symbolize God's omnipresence. Above, behind, below, above, to the right, to the left, to symbolize God's omnipotence. He's everywhere. And that's the practice of Reform Judaism. Remember, there are no offerings. You see how much of these holidays can't be done because there is no temple system? They can't be done today. Let's get to the take-home truth for this week. The Feast of Israel point to the provisions God has given us in Messiah. He is our high priest. He is our Goel. He's our kinsman redeemer. He is our, I'm going to blow next week. So that one's going to get left off till next week. But God's provisions for us in Messiah are pointed to by the Feasts of Israel. And that's why I like to give those sermons during the fall to churches, because it really is worthwhile. And so I will open it up for questions either from chat or Daniel, if you have anything you want to ask or state or plug in.
No, just that it's kind of eye-opening for me. I've never heard quite the feasts put in that light, that they point to the provision that God has for us.
Well, good. I mean, that's my hope with Leviticus, is that when we plug it back into the big story, we're going to get some really good insights stirring us, and we're going to see how things connect together. I'm looking just at the chat here to see if there's anything up. Okay, it doesn't. Oh, yep, ditto. Okay, Chris, I have to tell you, Chris was from Vermont, and I played a part in his spiritual story, and I remember, and I hope it's not just old age, I remember baptizing him. So, and Jack says no question. So, I'm sorry, Daniel, did I cut you off?
Oh, no, I was just saying that to me. I just blurted it out. I was thinking out loud.
So
that's neat. Yeah.
Chris, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for coming to Hillside Sunday School in absentia. I don't know. Maybe absentia isn't the right word. And Jesse, thank you so much for all of your encouragement. And Jack, I'm so glad you're here. So that is wonderful. Chris is my first rabbi. Blessings, Chris. We'll have to catch up a little bit more in the near future. If I get to Vermont, I need to see Chris and Chrissy. I did not tell Chris that I passed my orals, and I'm just doing the revisions, and I am technically Dr. Jeff Cran. But he's on there. Isn't that cool? All the way from Vermont. So,
well, you just did tell him that.
I guess I did. I guess I did. But not just by direct statement. Wow. So that's great. Well, according to the clock on the wall, Hillside Sunday School is going to end right now. And so you don't have to run to the sanctuary for the service. That's a little joke there for Daniel. Someday we may be back in that position. Who knows?
I sure hope so.
Yeah, it would be good to have life feel like life again. But we have been blessed. We have been able to start gathering, and there are like real restaurants opening up. What's up, Doc? I'm waiting to go to a party. And if anyone tells me that they have a pain in their side, I'll just say I'm not that kind of doctor. Thank you, Jack. I appreciate that. Now I just got to get the corrections in on time so we can upload this and get it published. So, but
I look forward to seeing it, Jeff.
it'll be a book. Believe me, it's that thick. Okay. God bless everybody. Let me just type that in. Relax the rest of the day and enjoy.
We will. Thank you, Jeff.
No problem.
Bye.
Bye. Okay. I need to stop screen share.